operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Gator Truth. I'm your host, Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to get started just talking about how I believe the Gators should start the year, and that is with a 4-0 start. The word there is should, not necessarily will, but we'll talk about the reasons for that going forward. I do apologize for a long delay in between episodes. If you ever see me out and about, we can talk about just some kind of rough stuff hitting the night of the bowl game and then threw me behind. But, anyways, here we are. It's August. We're looking down the Florida Gators starting the 2025 football season and got some stuff lined up for us after this. I'll be posting on the YouTube page for those that are listening on whatever podcast app you use. Definitely check out our YouTube. It is YouTube/Gator Truth. And what we're going to see is for the games following Miami, so the last 8 games of the season, Texas, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Georgia, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Florida State. We're going to have podcasters on from all 8 of those schools, and they're going to be talking about the offense, the defense, what a good year would be for their team. And it kind of shows some of the strengths and weaknesses of the teams on our schedule. And it's not a cakewalk schedule, although I do think it is being overvalued at times by some people. And some of that will be explained as you listen to these podcasters, and you might start to see a little bit of a trend with a few teams. Most of those have been recorded, so I can't wait to share those discussions. With that said, let's get into it. Before we talk about the team, got to talk about the Gators, of course, real quick. On offense, returning DJ Lagway, a guy who showed a ton of potential last year, still has some maturing and growing to do, dealt with some injuries in the spring, so didn't throw in the spring game, but that's all right. Should be healthy and ready to go for Long Island, which is our first opponent. In the backfield with him, you have Jaden Baugh, Jacoby Jackson returning. The combined duo rushed for over 1,100 yards last year, and that's with Montreal Johnson having 500 yards himself. So them becoming the guys will definitely help set the pace for this offense. As we know with Billy Napier, it's a run-first offense. And on the offensive line, returning 4 of 5 starters, you've got Austin Barber at tackle, and then there at the guard positions on one side, you do have Damian George, and next Austin Barber, Kanaje Harris. And then in the middle, All American Jake Slaughter at center, redshirt senior. Lots of good experience there. Damian George, rough year at tackle a few years ago, did a lot better last year at guard, and now steps in that guard for a position for a second year in a row. That right tackle looks to be Bryce Lovett, but we'll see if anyone else takes that position. It'll be interesting, but again, returning 4 guys from what was a decent unit last year, especially once all the shifting and trying to figure out who should be the best lineup is done. This year we've just got one question mark rather than several, and that is big, especially when you're talking about a all SEC guy like Austin Barber, an All American like Jake Slaughter, and then good experience pieces like Harris as a junior or Damian George, who is a redshirt senior. And, that's a running game. You also bring back Hayden Hansen there at the tight end position. He's been here for Billy Napier's whole career, very familiar with the system. So it's another piece that fits for this offense. And then the wide receivers, you bring in J. Michael Sturdivant from UCLA. You have Eugene Wilson back from injury, only played 4 games last year. Of course, Phenomenal true freshman year from him. Speaking of true freshman, Dallas Wilson, 5-star receiver. If you got to see or hear about the spring game, put up over 200 yards in that spring game. And then you have guys like Aiden Mazzell, who was a highlight reel when he got the ball last year. Unfortunately, did not get the ball too much. And the biggest highlight reel play that he had in the Mississippi State game was called back due to, we'll call it, a controversial penalty. But lots of talent there, as well as guys like Vernell Brown III, Moise Tunkara, which I'm sure I'm messing that name up, Tank Hawkins, TJ Abrams, guys who have been here for a little bit, 4-star receivers, lots of talent, not necessarily fully proven talent, but lots of talent in that receiver room, and guys that have been around several years, like Wilson, who's been here now year 3, Mazzell, year 3, Tank Hawkins, year 2, Dallas Wilson, very, very talented true freshman, and of course, J. Michael Sturdivant coming in. And one thing I can say is overall receiver has been a great position that we've had, transfer luck with the last few seasons. Can't wait to see how that works out. On defense, Caleb Banks, Tyreek Sapp, both of them come back. Both of them last year were our, 2 of our top 3 sack guys. George Gums on the other edge was the one in between them, number 2, and he returns. Also returning number 4 sack guy, Jaden Robinson at linebacker. But before we get to the linebackers, got to shout out, got to give the shout out to Jamari Lyons coming back from injury. Now, behind Gums and Sapp, you've got Cam James, you've got LJ McCray, and you've got Jaden Woods, who's been described, true freshman, who's been described as a freak. Now, the question I have, though, is the defensive tackle depth. They kind of allowed a lot of rushing yards. Granted, Caleb Banks didn't play, but in that spring game, the defensive tackles did get pushed around quite a bit. You've got Macau Boyro, returning for a second year. Brendan Bett, a guy who only played in one game last year for Baylor. Year before, played in almost every game, including one start. But again, a body we definitely needed, as well as some younger guys, transfers, and we'll just see how that works out. But with that said, the linebacking core, that is something I'm excited about. Talked about Jaden Robinson earlier, one of the top 5 sack guys, but he's probably not even one of our starters at linebacker. You've got Pup Howard, who was very good last year. You've got Miles Graham coming in, getting a bigger role. Very talented true freshman last year. Lots of experience, now hoping to turn it into a great campaign here in his second year with the program, as well as his true freshman last year, Aaron Childs, bringing that in. The 4 of them should be a very, very good linebacker unit for this Gator team. Definitely one that has a ton of experience. And then you have, at corner, Devin Moore, if he stays injury free, which is always a question mark with him. There's not been a year without an injury, but he's due for a full year. I would say you talk about a guy who's started for Florida for 4 years. When he plays, he's phenomenal. And if he stays healthy, could be an all SEC corner, in my opinion. You've got both safeties returning, Castell, Thornton, another new DB coach. Hopefully, with his tutelage, they're going to take even the next step. But you've got guys, again, 3 years of experience here. It's not just juniors who haven't played. We're talking Castell's had plenty of action the last 3 years, Thornton as well. At the other side, Cormani McClain or Dijon Johnson. Johnson played well when he played last season. He's now in his 3rd year in the program. McClain, of course, former 5-star recruit, came over from Colorado last year, had a nice pick 6 against Kentucky, has struggled at times. Hopefully this year, putting on muscle in the weight room over the summer will help out. If these guys are really doing well, then this could be a great unit, especially with a good first string defensive line and what I believe is a great linebacking core. And then the nickelback position, Sharif Denson, Aaron Gates, both guys have shown tremendous talent. Now, as they're both their third year in the system, this is the year they can make the jump and help this defense not be a middling Florida defense, but hopefully, and it looks like could be back to a Florida standard defense, a top 25 defense. And I think there's a definite chance that could happen as long as they stay healthy or have very minimal injuries. So, after running through real quick on the Gator roster, which I am pretty high on, at least roster wise, um, so after going through that, I got to say the first two games, Long Island University, I don't think that's going to be much of a game. So without going into it too much, we'll do a preview as it comes to be that time. But I do think that's one we can chalk up as a win for the Gators. There has been rumors of some small injuries and stuff coming out of camp. I've said if people have to sit out week one, sit them out so that way they're healthy going into week two. Week two, USF ends its 3-game contract with UF. Of course, first game was 2021 at USF, 2022 return trip, and then game 3 of the 2-for-1 is this season. And this is a USF team that is interesting to watch. They have great games 2 years ago, really gave Bama all they could handle. Last year, gave Bama all they could handle for 3 quarters before being blown out, but then at the same time, lost some games against much worse opponents and also got blown out by Miami. With this game being in the swamp, I do need to say that close Alabama game was in the rain in Tampa, where it's going to be in the swamp. I don't think this is a game where it should be close, unlike the 2022 game where it was a close game and USF missed a field goal late for the Gators to secure the win. So running through those two real quick, just because I believe the 2-0 start, I don't believe that's controversial for anyone to say. But who knows? Hopefully, I'm not wrong about that, because if it is controversial or if we somehow drop one of those games, it's not going to be a fun year. And I'll just say that right now. But it is what it is. Again, I think both those games end up being multi-score wins for the Gators. Now, it's time to get into the next two games, both away games. Both games are kind of what's the best way to put it? Against opponents that are known to be tough. One, you could say, has a great home field advantage. The other, it'll be the best home crowd that they've seen in quite a while. And of course, I'm talking about LSU and Miami. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about what the Tigers bring to the table. So, one thing I've said is that it is good we're catching LSU early. Week 3, they start off playing Notre Dame, and then they have a cupcake, then they have us. Well, here's the thing. The LSU offense, Nussmeier does return, and he's a guy that last year had 4,000 passing yards. It just is what it is. Will Miles has a great article on Read and Reaction, how he doesn't think some of the deficiencies of Nussmeier will improve. And of course, last year in the swamp, we got pressure on Nussmeier, and that helped propel the Gators to the upset in the swamp. And it was a memorable day for all of us Gator fans. With that said, protecting Nussmeier, they've got 4 new starters. They had both their tackles drafted first round, third round, and also the guards were drafted. What's funny is they have 4 new starters on the offensive line. However, it's really, in a way, 5 new starters. And you're wondering, how is 4 really 5? Well, from what it sounds like, trying to read up on this team, because unfortunately I didn't have a LSU podcast to talk to, or did not talk to one. It sounds like their center from last year, might be moving to guard, while Braylon Moore, a transfer from Virginia Tech, is set to come in and play center. So if you're moving the one returning starter around to a new position, that's like 5 new starters. And early in the season, I talked earlier how we had issues trying to figure out what the best combo is. Well, you're talking about you're in game 3, you may not have the best combo yet. And meanwhile, you're facing, like I said, our first string D line, our second string, as far as the outside guys. Those are some pretty good guys. And I'm not sure how you're going to be able to, uh, maybe you portaled well and recruited really well, and you've got an SEC offensive line ready to go. But I just don't see it in game 3 being perfectly ready to go, especially after the trouble that our D line and linebacking court gave that offensive line last year with guys that were multi-year starters like the tackles and guards who now are gone off to the NFL. Also, 4 of the 5 top reception leaders are gone for LSU, including Mason Taylor, who is the all time leader in receiving yards for LSU. And I will say, they do have their top receiver from last year returning. And along with that, they do bring in Anderson and Barian Brown. Brown, of course, was big at Kentucky. These are guys who are very experienced to go on with with their leading returner, Anderson. Um, and then the running back Durham returns. He had 750 yards in 2024. The question is, how are the new receivers going to do? You've got talent there. How do they fit in the offense? And the most important thing, is there going to be time for Nussmeier to throw to them? For a guy like Durham, is there going to be space to run with that new look offensive line? That is a big question that LSU will have to answer, and answer early against Notre Dame. But in a way, might be even harder going against a hungry, very determined Gator team to show that this is not the slow start Gators of Billy Napier's tenure so far overall. On defense, LSU 76 against the pass in 2024. Those watching on YouTube, it says 2025. That is my bad. But anyways, I say that to say this was not particularly a great LSU defense already last year. Meanwhile, they're replacing their their defensive ends, they're replacing their defensive tackles, um, and they have brought in some replacements at edge. They return, some of they return some of their production on that line, but not much. At least 23 of 34 team sacks last year are being replaced on this LSU defense. And I will say, you move back just like Florida, the linebacker game is strong. There are the Weeks brothers, and you also have Harold Perkins. Although there is a rumor Harold Perkins, who last year had some injuries, did not play at Florida. Very good linebacker, but there's rumors that they may try him at star, which is kind of like a nickelback position. And so if they try that, will it work out? I mean, they've got the good linebacker room, but if there's an injury or something, do you move Perkins back over? Will Perkins work out? It's a good question to ask. And the DB room, you know, many transfers in, and the ones that are still there were mixed bag in 2024. As I said, 76 against the pass in 2024. And when you're bringing in all these transfers and you've got guys who are so in that secondary, are they going to be ready and at full, communication mode, full like comfort in the offense by game 3? That's a good question. I'm not sure they are, especially if they have a rough time against the Irish and they're trying new things to see what they can do. And then you've got a guy like, like DJ Lagway, who can hit a deep ball quite accurately and take the top off the defense. And you've got receivers that can catch and run like a Trey Wilson or like Dallas Wilson showed he could do in the spring game. So it's something that the Gators should be able to take advantage of. But I will say, speaking of transfers, two familiar faces for the Gators are on that LSU defense. And while I'm thinking about it, one thing you'll see if you watch these team previews that we'll have going up on the channel, if I see a former Gator, I definitely do ask those those podcasters for that school about how that Gator is doing. But anyways, LSU, Jack Pyburn transferred last year. Didn't have too many sacks for the Gators, but did lots of great things well. I have a little bit of concern depending on which side of the line he lines up on because he did have power and did blow some plays up, even though he wasn't getting sacks for the Gators. And then a DB, Jakeem Jackson, last year got injured early. He's transferred to LSU. It'll be interesting to see how much he plays against the Gators. But with that said, with the Gators' offensive advantage, at least as it comes to returning talent, and also the issue of LSU's defense or LSU's offense replacing the O line, our defense returns a lot of experience, a lot of production. I think this is a game, even though playing in Baton Rouge at night is tough. This is a game that the Gators should, and of course, that keyword being should, pull off at least on paper because of the just ridiculous amount of changes going on, at least personnel wise, at LSU. And if you're someone who's heard, the Gators are building through development, not through the portal, if you believe that development outdoes the portal, then this is a game that you've got to prove that because this is legitimately the Gators building their team without too much portal use against a heavy portal team for the LSU Tigers. Speaking of portal, let's talk about game 4, and that is our trip to Miami to take on the Hurricanes. Of course, a big revenge game after we lost 41-17 last year, which I'm not going to sit here and make excuses, or I'm not going to say, well, they lost a Pop Tart ball, so that loss is fine with me, as some have done on Twitter. I'm not going to do that. Sorry if you'd wish I would. But anyways, if you're watching on YouTube, you see me with a slide up. If you're listening, you don't, I'll read it to you. Here's what Miami is replacing on offense. And tell me if this does not show a great change for an offense. Miami's replacing a 4,300-yard passer in Cam Ward. They're replacing a 1,000-yard running back in Damian Martinez. They're replacing a 1,000-yard receiver in Restrepo, and their top 6 leaders in receptions from 2024. What that tells me is it's a completely new passing game. And, well, it's going to be interesting to see. So let's look a little bit deeper at this Miami offense. Miami brings in Carson Beck through the transfer portal, 3,500 yards in 2024. 3,500 yards, but just like Nuss, a little bit of a mixed bag. So it'll be curious to see how he does in this Miami offense, especially as he's been dealing with injuries during his transition to the Hurricanes. At running back, I will say the Hurricanes are very similar to us. They return a combination of running backs that had over 1,000 yards, and Fletcher and Lyle. They do bring in from LSU CJ Daniels to kind of build back up their receiving core that they lost. And last year, Daniels had 480 yards for LSU receiving. However, in 2023, he was a 1,000-yard receiver for Liberty. I do think there's a chance in this offense, if it's wide open and if Beck's playing well, for him to get back to those 1,000 yards. Another thing that this Miami offense has in common with this Florida offense, at least, we're talking about returning backs that combine for 1,000 yards. And the other thing is they're returning 4 offensive line starters. They brought in a transfer for the 5th slot. However, left guard is an interesting position battle because they've got the left guard who started the year as a starter and then went down against us and missed the rest of the year. Now coming back and battling for that left guard spot with the guy who took over for him. And overall, I believe did pretty well for them last season. So losing a lot of production, trying to replace in the portal, it'll be quite the question of can Miami replace through the portal on this offense after losing, again, a 4,300-yard passer, 1,000-yard running back, 1,000-yard receiver, and their top 6 leaders in receptions, including their like 7th or 8th year tight end, whatever he was last year. And again, I talked about LSU. If you're saying, hey, it's development, not portal, this is another game. Development versus portal. You can't let the portal team lose if that's what your big selling point is, especially after last year and that beatdown at home. You've got to get the revenge here. Now, on the Miami defense, Miami's replacing 7 of their top 10 tacklers. They do return on their edges. I mean, granted, these guys were backups last year, but they returned Bain and Mesidor, who combined had 9 sacks in 2024. They are pretty good at linebacker. Will Basainth returns. He was their number 2 tackler last season. And they also bring in a guy, Torre, from Rutgers, who did not play last year, but was very good for the Knights the year before. At corner, they return 1 guy, and then the rest seem to be a lot of transfers. It is what it is. But again, we're talking how quickly can these guys gel? How quickly can they learn the system? Because at safety, you're replacing your top 2 safeties as well. Can you be a great unit by week 4 where you're bringing in all these new guys plus a new DB coach by the name of Will Harris, who was a coach for the Gators last year for DBs? A lot of people talk about Will Harris was the reason we allowed Cam Ward to throw for so much last year. I think in a way that's an overblown excuse, but I do think some of that is valid. I mean, there are things that could have been done everywhere a little bit differently to make things better, like a better pass rush kind of helps out, but also there were things DBs did terrible as well. But I had to point that out as, again, Gators we see elsewhere or former Gator coaches. And we'll be seeing more of those when we get to Texas A&M for sure. Well, anyways, that was a brief look at why I think the Gators should start 4-0. Again, Long Island, USF. There's no reason in year 4 you should be losing to non-power 4 teams in the regular season. And then you got an LSU team that it's early in the year. You're catching them as they're trying to figure things out. You've got to take advantage. You've got to use that defensive line to harass Nussmeier and do exactly what you did last year, and that's pull off the win against the Tigers through a great defensive effort. But also, it's great timing. As I said, you catch LSU in October, November, where we've seen this game most years. They may have figured out some of the issues, but getting them game 3, getting them early, where we've got a lot more returning production, a lot more guys who have been in the system for years while they're breaking in a lot of transfers. They're breaking in 5 new positions on the offensive line, 4 new starters. I think that weighs in favor of the Gators as a game. The Gators should win. And then Miami, again, replacing a ton on offense, a lot on that defensive line, a lot on that defensive secondary, lots of turnover. You catch them week 4. You should have a revenge game in mind. This is a game even without all that, I think you've got to win. I think the Gators should win. Go into the first bye week 4-0, based on, hey, we've got DJ Lagway, we've got lots of production returning, we've got an offensive line that's got an All-American and an All-SEC, and we've got a defense full of experience. So, with that said, I do believe a 4-0 start is not only possible, I believe it's what we should see. And with that said, thank you all for listening. And as always, go Gators.